Now that we've built up this mix using the regular Hall algorithm, let's upgrade them to Random Hall and Random Hall HD. But before we get there, let's explain why using Random Hall and the idea of randomness inside of an algorithmic reverb is such a quantum leap forward compared to the older designs. So the idea of randomness comes into reverb design because real large spaces like concert halls aren't predictable over time. So you might think that you could recognize a hall by its frequency response and its decay and frequency response over time. But actually, if you took an impulse response of a hall and then took another one a few seconds later, you're actually going to end up with different impulse responses, meaning its decay and frequency response is changing ever so slightly over time. Now, people have theorized that that's down to air currents in the room, temperature fluctuations, as well as movement of people too in a space. So the conception that a room remains the same over time is just simply not true. And one of the ways that the original algorithm designers got around this fact was adding a sense of randomization to the algorithm itself. Now, this is not modulating the delay lines in the typical way that removes some of the metallic artifacts from the tail of the reverb. This is true randomization. And what this is going to do is it's going to help increase the width of the reverb and the depth of the reverb, and also give it more movement over time. So it's going to sound less static. It's going to sound less like a convolution reverb, and it's going to just move and have a lot more character and a lot more density to it. So what are the things you should be listening out for when you're listening to random halls? Well, for me, it's the overall width of things, it's the overall sense of movement, okay, and it's also the fact that there's different things happening on the left hand side and the right hand side, and what that's going to do is make it sound like the reverb is surrounding you a lot more. So let's just listen to the acoustic guitar with the original Hall algorithm, and then I'm going to switch it to the Random Hall HD and the Random Hall. So let's start with the Hall, then we're going to go to Random Hall, and finally Random Hall HD. Okay, so that was comparing Hall to Random Hall, and for me what I heard when I switched it to Random Hall was all of a sudden it got a lot wider, a lot more movement and interesting, and the final thing that I didn't mention before is an increased low frequency response. So this randomization is really helping to retain low frequency information in the reverb tail, and that to me makes things sound thicker, bigger and larger than life, and much more like a real concert hall than the previous Hall algorithm. So now let's move on to the Random Hall HD. So Random Hall HD is evolution on top of the Random Hall, and Random Hall HD is not available in the original 480L hardware. This is something created by Relab's founder Martin Lind, and he took away the technical restrictions that were present in the original Random Hall algorithm, because again, things like the converters in the original 480L were 18-bit, and also there was severe limitations in the algorithm itself because of the technology at the time. So what you're going to find with Random Hall HD is it's going to be denser, retain more low frequency information, and just be a step up again from the Random Hall. So what I really heard here with Random Hall HD is it had a real smooth character about it. It seemed to enhance not just the low frequencies further, but also the mids and the highs, and it really made the reverb just feel really forward, but without setting the instrument further back in the mix. So let's go ahead and use Random Hall HD on all of our sends, and let's just listen to the change in character. So to do this, I'm going to move these original halls further down, and I'm going to duplicate them and switch all of these to Random Hall HD, and then we can audition each one. So I'm going to start out with the halls that are on this first insert chain, and then we're going to flick to the random halls after. Great, so hopefully what you were hearing there as I flick between the two is the extra movement and the richness that came from having the Random Hall HDs. Now, one thing for me though is the movement was just a little fast on how they're set right now. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and slow down the rate of movement. So if we go to the modulation page, we can turn down the spin and the wander, and the spin itself is going to basically be like the rate, so we can kind of bring that down. So what I was doing there is messing with the spin, which is like the modulation rate, as well as the wander, which was much more like the modulation depth, okay? And that was just massaging it in and fine-tuning it to work with the source material. One final tidbit of information before I end this video is that if we go into the setup menu and go into I/O here, if we set this to aux input, Martin's added a little bit of an Easter egg here too, and the density of the low frequency reflections is increased in aux mode. So I usually find that when I'm using Random Hall, setting it to this input output mode just really makes it extra rich. And now that we have more movement, it feels less static and just sounds way more exciting. And I was actually able to increase the reverb time on the vocal even longer without it getting in the way of the next notes and the dry sound. So let's just finally compare this one more time between the original Hall algorithm and the Random Hall HDs. And now for me, I actually sometimes prefer the normal Hall algorithm, especially as it gets more ethereal and longer. So I'm going to go ahead and change this string Hall back to the original Hall, and we're going to get a blend of both now. So let's have a listen to that. 'Cause they don't want me as I am. They would never understand. So hopefully what you're hearing there is that the longer ethereal tail of that string Hall that we added, that being flatter and having less movement adds just like a kind of sheen in the background that is not moving quite so much. So even though we have things like Random Hall and the Random Hall HD algorithm, that doesn't mean that there isn't space for using the original Hall algorithm. And if you want to create less realistic spaces, the original Hall algorithm also has a chorus setting here, which can kind of create more artificial types of otherworldly sounds, you know, like Vangelis string sounds or 80s drum sounds as well. So feel free to experiment with those. And in the next video, we're going to be looking at creating smaller spaces like rooms and studios.